Hello, I'm Sanj and welcome to the Future of Wellbeing, a meaningful conversation hosted by myself with very special individuals who genuinely and deeply care about others living their best lives. Get ready, get excited, and most importantly, enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome, Adriano, to the Future of Wellbeing. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Before we get started, it would be wonderful for you to be able to introduce yourself for the benefit of those watching and listening right now.
Sure. Well, first of all, Sanj, thank you very much for inviting me on to this conversation with you. We've been having a terrific conversation off air a moment ago. It's clear that you're a wonderful person just with a misguided taste in football clubs. That's okay. I mean, everyone's got to have some type of vice, my friend. My name's Adriano Prato, and I'm based here in the most livable city in the world, Melbourne, Australia. And I've been very fortunate in my life to have spent the majority of my professional career in schools, predominantly secondary schools, and predominantly Catholic independent secondary schools in Melbourne. And during those 26 years, 16 of them I've spent as the deputy head of two schools, and being able to support the growth not only of the staff, but of course the young people in my care at the time. Those schools, some are single-sex boys, some were single-sex girls, some were co-educational kind of facilities. Since then, in 2019, I took the courageous steps, I might think pretty foolish and crazy, to just simply give up a career in that space, earning a really good income at an outstanding secondary school here in Melbourne. But I decided that I wanted to have a bit of a sea change and start attending to my wellness, actually, in a very different way than what I had been previously, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I then decided to take 2020 off and just do nothing. And in fact, I was sitting online looking at a nice kind of accommodation in Sicily for a month, and then Morocco. But then this thing called COVID hit, and that just changed the world, right? And then I got a phone call from a professor from the University of Tasmania, Dr. Philip Cummings, and asked if I'd do a podcast, if I would be interested in doing a podcast series. And I said, as long as it's called Game Changers, hence the image behind me, and that's our kind of branding, as long as it's called Game Changers, and as long as it's a conversation about changing the school. And so we started Game Changers. And within a couple of weeks, we realized that we've got an audience, and people are listening and really interested. And then when COVID really hit, where lockdown was a real reality for all of us here in Australia, and particularly in Melbourne, which had one of the longest lockdowns in most jurisdictions around the world, we started getting a lot of phone calls of people asking us, what do we do? And all of a sudden, although we don't see ourselves as the game changers, Phil and I, it's the guests that we have are the game changers. We were seen in that light as a byproduct. And so we put together a toolkit, and we put this toolkit together really quickly. And in this toolkit, we provided guidance on how to support staff, students, parents, and so on. And it was downloaded 20,000 times in 4 days. Wow. And we were blown away by this response. So we looked at each other and said, why don't we just start a business? And we did. So we've started this global network called School for Tomorrow. We're only 6 months young, and we're a very unique proposition of being a global network where we actually focus on students, teachers, school leaders, and school teams. So it's the entire ecosystem of learning. The only one at the moment that's not part of that conversation, I suppose, are the parents directly, but many educators are parents. So, that's part of the conversation. And we've developed a dynamic online platform where we have over 1,500 members from across the globe who collaborate in that particular space on a frequent basis and share their learning. And we're now about to enter into our 7th series of the Game Changers podcast, and we're about to hit 100,000 followers. So we're really excited about the growth of that particular platform and being able to showcase amazing educators, social entrepreneurs, corporate disruptors on our platform who are really agitating for doing schooling differently. And there's no greater time than the present to do it.
Wow. What an introduction. Jeez, I
There
love
you
that.
go.
So, so many, key themes there, about, working within schools. So you've got that substance, you've got that credibility of spending, decades within the school environment, to then want to take that time off, to take that step back and just think about life, which is, again, something very desirable for a lot of people, pre-COVID, of course. Then COVID happened, and you've not just gone with it, you've taken that step back and said, right, what can we do about it now? Of course, you had that phone call initially, but as a result of that, to create a community of people, firstly shows what you're doing is fantastic, but also the need of people to be supported during this time. And also that education needs to change, which of course we're going to come on to in a minute, but it's incredible that you've built that to such a community already.
Yeah, look, the interesting thing about your observation there is that change has already been happening, right? Change has been happening a long time before COVID. COVID's been the accelerator and has demonstrated to, particularly an industry like education, that for some reason has been immune to disruption or resisted the integration of technology in a really meaningful way, as opposed to just word processing. It's already been there. So there are so many people across this globe that have been agitating for a new story for quite some time. And we're one of many, many dynamic organisations that want to create human-centred learning ecosystems, ones that are less about scores and more about significance, and leverage the innate possibility of our humanness, which, again, I think we're going to explore in a moment.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Set me up perfectly for the first question of our conversation. But again, focusing on the human-centered element, focus on the quality of education, focusing on the skills that people gain from education, brings us on to, of course, well-being, which is, the name of this series. But if I was to ask you, Adriano, what would you describe as well-being? How would you define well-being, and which phase of your life did you start to prioritize your well-being?
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for the question, Sanj. I think it's a really important question, and a question that I would encourage all of your listeners to really kind of contemplate in a very deep consciousness. For me, I refer to wellness actually as this kind of dynamic life process of change and continual growth. And that for me, it's about a state of complete physical, mental, spiritual, environmental, financial, and even social well-being. And that all these dimensions of wellness are interrelated and are crucial to fulfilling a flourishing life. And to the second part of your question, where you asked me to think about when did I start prioritizing it, for me, that's probably the most interesting part. And that is, for many years I didn't. That's the reality. I just didn't. And I placed the well-being of others, especially those in the learning communities that I led, I placed them always first. Then after a number of kind of awe moments and some personal kind of challenges or even tragedy, I started to realize that I needed to better attend to my personal wellness and make it a priority. And I introduced myself to more travel encounters actually. And that for me, they became this important opportunity to kind of feed and nourish my inherent curiosity about life, about learning, and about love. And to complement those kind of encounters with self, with place, and the other, I also incorporate quite a bit of prayer as a form of meditation and this kind of deep tuning in and consciousness of the world within and around me.
Wow. So, wow, again, but when was there a time, like a month or a year, which you started to travel more, maybe within Australia or beyond? Was there a clear point where you said, I want to explore this, I need to explore more of this?
I've been very fortunate, Sanj, in my life I started traveling independently from the age of 17, and I'm 49 now. And I've been very privileged to have now experienced language, culture, food, people, customs across 5 of our 7 continents. I'm yet to get to Antarctica. That will happen, of course. And I'm yet to do South America. I've done Central America, North America, but not South America in its totality. So there's still more learning to do. And what I discovered really quickly in my very, very first travel experiences were, I discovered a lot about my own capacity to be resourceful, to respond to situations that normally aren't existing in my kind of normal day-to-day life existence. But I discovered very quickly that binary thinking and the hardwiring that I'd been conditioned to by being in such a privileged country of Australia and an advanced country like Australia, coming from a strong migrant background that has great rich history, the Italians, and my mother being Austrian, and a dynamic, culture in there as a family and purpose and faith and optimism and creativity even. That was a privilege. And what I learned very quickly was that there wasn't any one way to think. And what travel allowed me to do, that's why I call them awe moments. It's allowed me to be open to the possibility of not only myself, but more importantly, the places I encounter and the people I encounter. And it allows me to better understand my place in this world as a steward during this time and being a contributor to society, as opposed to someone who's simply content on taking. And encountering people, if you ever get an opportunity to meet Guatemalan people in the town of Chichicastenango up on top of a mountain, isn't that the best name? Chichicastenango, on top of it. I probably pronounced it wrong, and I really apologize for all Guatemalans listening right now. But on top of a mountain and seeing the way these people live, and they'll give you anything. They'll open their doors to you. Or you have an opportunity to go over in Cambodia and immerse yourself there with communities that have very little, but they'll give you their last bowl of rice. Or I spent 6 weeks once in South Africa in the townships of Alexandra, and first time I felt like a minority because I was the only white person in a sea of black South Africans. And yes, was there skepticism on their behalf? Was there suspicion? Sure. But I'm thinking, well, I'm only experiencing probably what white and Caucasian people have inflicted upon black and brown people for a very, very long time. But very quickly they invite me into their very humble homes. And you start realizing very quickly that it reminds you of your smallness. And it reminds you very quickly that you shouldn't take yourself all that seriously, because what matters in this world is that these people are no different to me. I'm not better than them. They're not better than I am. In fact, we're all equal. But life has dealt me a different hand to some of them. And my awe moment is that I should never take advantage of that. And that privilege is one of why that has kept me in schools for so long, because it's about ultimately the other.
I love that. Gosh, I'm definitely going to... How do you say that place in Guatemala again? Could you say it a bit slower?
Chichicastenango. Chichicastenango. It's got about 87 letters in it, I think. But I'm sure there'll be someone in the chat eventually when this is posted that will go, that's not how you pronounce it, Exactly. And like I said, I apologize. But look, there's and to continue to have our minds open to our inherent possibility. I think it's crucial for our collective humanity.
Yeah, and talking about that inherent possibility leads me on to the next focus, which is about what you do on a day-to-day basis, which is, of course, work within education and progress the movement of education and the purpose of education and the equipping of what education gives, not only students, but also the community. So two-part question again, Adriano. So firstly, how has COVID accelerated or impacted the way that you work? Of course, I know you mentioned the podcast, but beyond that, how do you see, how do you want is maybe more appropriate question, but how do you want to see education then progress given what's happened over the past year, and taking the learnings from that and using them to the best of the ability?
The truth of the matter is that the pandemic has affected us all. There has been an undeniable state of human suffering as a result of it. And particularly those countries and communities, more remote, more rural, more economically disadvantaged, have been hit by this more profoundly than many others. We may have been in a 14 consecutive day lockdown here in Victoria. And as arduous as that was psychologically, it pales into insignificant compared to what others around this world have to experience on a daily basis. And I remind myself of that all the time. But it did impact us. And from an organizational point of view, our educational enterprise in A School for Tomorrow, to maintain our client and schoolwork that we've been doing, this great pause moment, that's why I like to refer to COVID as, has allowed us to develop creative solutions for supporting our global partnerships. And through the use of technology tools that ensure that we remain deeply connected and relevant. It also has allowed us to reassess our business model and curate this dynamic online learning community that I mentioned to you a moment ago on the one platform, better catering for the individual learning needs of students, teachers, school leaders, and school teams. To the next question, this idea of the future of education, it's such a big and important question. And I suppose, how long do you have? Because I could be here all night, right? But what I'll say is this, throughout all of 2020 during the pandemic and throughout our Game Changers podcast and through our consulting and research practice, I know Dr. Phil Cummings, the other host of Game Changers, and I, we've been engaged in many, many rich conversations with colleagues around the world about what is happening in education in response to the COVID-19 pandemic that has impacted 1.6 billion children across the globe. I mean, that's massive, right? Absolutely massive. And transformation to a new or a next normal has been brought on by things that are beyond our control. We know that. And we have learned and continue to learn so much about the capacity of our profession to respond to a situation of crisis in such a constructive and effective way. What seemed impossible or even undesirable, Sanj, just a few months ago, I should say, is now telling us that we can do it when we recognize the imperative to simply take the big step forward. It's amazing what has happened, how quickly governments have moved, how quickly systems have moved in the moment of a crisis. Why can't that be the norm always? Why does there have to be such red tape in everything? If it's a good idea, or if it's an idea that has legs, let's trial it. Let's see where it goes. What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, either we're going to learn or we're going to succeed. I see both of those as progress, right? And so what we need to start thinking about is that this is not just simply about a shift towards greater integration of technology in education either, although that is certainly part of the answer. This is about recognizing that we don't have to do things for the sake of doing them the way that we once done them previously. And shifting our educational system to meet the demands of the times that has meant increasingly moving away from this industrial model that so many schools are used to and systems use of the one size fits all, in which a teacher stands and delivers and a learner just simply sits and gets. That kind of passivity is over. And I'll say this, schooling as we once knew it is over. And that's a very provocative thing to say, but that's my belief. What we believe is that the world has already changed prior to the pandemic. In their excellent, I've got a little quote here, in their excellent 2020 report titled Workforce of the Future, the Competing Forces Shaping 2030, PwC, the huge organization, they identified megatrends shaping our future. Swift advances in technological innovation, demographic shifts, rapid urbanization, shifts in global and economic power, resource scarcity, and climate change are tremendous forces of reshaping society. So these things were happening well before COVID hit. So society has been changing at rates never seen before due to the profoundness of artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, and those megatrends I just mentioned. So perhaps the real question is not just about what the future of education is, but the real question should be, how do we best prepare young people for this new world environment? And future schools are therefore empowered to use the potential of technologies to liberate learning from past conventions and connect learners in new and powerful ways that is more personalized, that is more individual. The past was interactive. I believe the future is highly participative. We need to understand that learning is no longer a place, but it is an important social contract where the following things have to happen, where wellness comes first, where we acknowledge that time is fluid, meaning that learning activity occurs anytime, anywhere, by anyone. And finally, where community is king, leveraging local, regional, and global connectedness and active citizenship on a scale that we have never seen before. And so I suppose I'm talking to you today, mate, about a learning ecosystem that is deeply human-centered, that is technology enriched, that is people, place, planet conscious, and intentionally purposeful around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it, Adriano. I want to again dive deeper into one particular element, but you mentioned the community there, and again, in a world where like you say, change was happening at a rapid pace before, in terms of accessibility and opportunity through technology, but obviously that's been enhanced or highlighted more over the past 12 to 14 months. But where do you see the importance of community within education, especially? Like, what is it that springs out to you in terms of the importance of community?
Well, if we've learned anything during COVID-19 from a school context, is that people matter, right? And for us to best understand how we serve a diverse range of people, we have to come together and have a deep dialogue with each other and focus on the things that are our inherent strengths instead of focusing on what divides us. And I actually believe what COVID has demonstrated about schools is that they're not just places of learning, right? They're important social constructs where communities gather, adults, young people, businesses, beyond the boundaries of the campus fence, all come together to support the character apprenticeship that's between the teacher and the student, and the peer relationship and exchange that happens on campus, you know, and in the clubs that they run, in the sporting activities, in the arts departments, in the musical productions, in the musical ensembles, you know, in the debating clubs. All these things create community where young people are developing executive functioning, they're developing self-regulation, they're developing empathy and listening skills, they're developing a capacity to self-regulate and be open to the possibility of the other. So much of that is about being community-minded. And the most successful areas around this world that has responded so positively to this crisis are ones that treated it as primarily a health crisis, which is a human crisis, as opposed to an economic crisis, which is a capitalist crisis then, right? I'm not denying that there was an economic element to this. Of course there was, right? But this was a human crisis, and that's why we had to approach it from a health context. If we do that more and more, we have to then acknowledge that the community has got to be central to solving those problems. What it's also heightened to us is that the digital divide and inequity is the real pandemic in this world. And the next part, of course, is the mental health of people. That's another massive pandemic, particularly in very developed Western countries, right? So if we know these things, the only way that we're going to start solving them is if we come together and start working through it systematically through an open dialogue, not suspicion, not greed, but openness to the possibility of. I mean, you and I are now connecting remotely, right, from two parts of the world, yeah? We also come from culturally two completely different backgrounds, but we are able to communicate through us advancing as humans, and technology has been able to bring us together, but we're also communicating because you and I are two people who are open to each other's possibility, yeah? And the more and more that we are open as a community to that, and the communities are going to solve these problems about the injustice of inequity and the injustice of the digital divide. There are remote communities in Australia, rural communities in Australia, Indigenous communities in Australia that didn't have the same access than some of the young people in Melbourne or Sydney or Perth or Brisbane may have had. That's a crime. That just shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't have a scenario where there's this inequity. And it's about time the community come together, and we've got to start thinking about how do we open our school borders? How do we go beyond our borders to invite everyone into the opportunity and the promise and the audacious hope of why that school exists in the first place? And community has got to be a central component to that.
No, I love it. I love it. And again, that leads me beautifully on to traits or skills that
Sure.
important people who we call leaders, important people within this situation or within this context to have? And as somebody who's led for many years, and as somebody who's worked with leaders, some you would have loved, some you would have not so loved, and I'm sure we could use other words for that too. But in terms of if you were to share two world-class traits, or two traits that world-class leaders should display, what would those two traits be and why?
Okay. I'll like to respond in this way. For me, striving for remarkable leadership requires aspirant and established leaders to firstly deeply understand their personal why and commit to their ongoing self-actualization, working resolutely to forge a kind of new horizon of their own true north from within through the profoundness of vulnerability, deep reflection, and purpose. So that's my first thing I'll say.
Love it.
Discover your why. And if you don't know what your why is, I think you're just going through motions. It feels soulless. Secondly, remarkable leaders deeply understand their role around stewardship and around the profit of the community in which they serve and their work belongs to, where we understand the value in finding a compassionate voice, one that is genuinely conscious of all people in the communities that one leads and their inherent possibility, where remarkable leaders wake up each day choosing courage over comfort, with remarkable leaders understanding that they have a responsibility to shepherd all in their learning community to a next or a new or even better normal through the power of inclusion, foresight, and vision. This is really about leaders that have a capacity of tuning in and outward and being brave enough to anticipate evolution and opportunity born from moments of real struggle and challenge. And finally, I'll say this about remarkable leaders, that remarkable leaders are ultimately about overcoming all obstacles when the majority of society are frozen in the old reality. And that they're truly remarkable, and dare I say it, courageous leaders are not afraid to become or reveal who they really are for themselves and for the places and the people they serve.
That's exceptional. That's exceptional. Gosh, I'm going to be listening to this so many times just to, I have to get it transcribed. Jeez. Quotes within quotes. I love this.
Yeah. It's surely we exist because we're all on a personal journey of discovery, right? And we've got to be really in tune with that why. And once we become really comfortable with that why, surely we have a responsibility then as active citizens and responsible citizens to contribute positively to the advancement and growth of all humans. And the challenge, of course, is, are we going to have missteps along the way when we do that? Absolutely we will. Because I'm not suggesting that remarkable leaders are arrogant enough to think they have all the answers. That's not right, because I said a moment ago, part of their reality is through the power of inclusion, foresight, and vision. You want to create a shared vision because you want to be inclusive. And it's got to come from that construct, as I said earlier, even in the construct of schools, because it's not just about schooling, it's about society as a whole. One that is intentionally purposeful around diversity, inclusion, and equity. I mean, I don't know what we're afraid of. I don't understand what we're afraid of about the other, And so the day that remarkable leaders have the courage to step outside of the binary thinking of what, and the cookie cutter version of what a leader looks like, is the day that we understand the power of fraternal humanity.
Jeez, I love it. I love it. This conversation will happen again, and the depth of which you could go to really excites me, but thrills me at the same time. That would be thrilling to listen to. And last question, Adriano. I'm really grateful for the depth and the the amount that you've thought about these answers, I can clearly see how much this, this topic means to you. But again, somebody who's worked within so many teams, and again, you mentioned the important aspect of community inclusion, and not just ideas. These remarkable leaders they don't have the answers, and again, that's where the community comes from, because different people spread different ideas and generate different kinds of conversations, which wouldn't have happened if said individuals by themselves. So what is again, I'm going to put you on the spot just for one, but what would your one top tip be for teams to sustain, or build first, but build and sustain a culture of well-being? What would your one top tip be?
So it's clear to me, Sanj, that the role of governments is increasingly around the wellness of its people. And the day they stop attending to the wellness of the people, they should no longer be in government. Mm. And for that to occur, we have to curate powerful future builders who understand the construct of teams. Because team is community. Mm-hmm. And so my understanding of the importance of the notion of that we are simply better together. Mm-hmm. And to sustain well-being in teams, we have to be open to that notion that we are better together. And I would say that by making the construct of empathy as the trait central to all team gatherings, all team meetings, and the overall practice of that team. The type of, I'll describe empathy this way in a team environment, the type of listening to understand, not listening to simply respond.
Absolutely.
And for me, that's the number one tip to sustaining the well-being of a team.
Wow. And again, just going deeper into the listening to understand versus listening to respond, is that something that feel like you've had for a long time? Was that something you learned and then implemented and have developed over X time? Or was it like in terms of your own journey of listening?
Yeah, again, I'll say this. I'm not sitting here as any sage that has all the answers. I'm still on a journey of discovery myself, and this is why I love opportunities like this to meet people I haven't met before and delve straight deep into the stuff that matters, our inherent humanity. And so what I've learned along my journey is that sometimes communities just want to be led at different times, that they want to hand over the reins and say, please give us guidance here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At other times, they are desperate to be included in the conversation, and they want to shape and form the conversation. And so at different times calls us to respond when we listen, to simply give a response. Mm-hmm. And other times it requires us to understand when people are talking. But I actually feel that first construct, listening to understand, is more and more relevant today than ever before. We are a world not only in the grips of a pandemic, but we're in a world in a crisis of serious indifference. And what we have seen in the last 12 to 18 months through the voice of people who have felt so oppressed for a very long time, through the Black Lives Movement, through an entire gender of women who have felt oppressed for so long, through them moving forward and more forward and louder around their voice. This is not about being woke. This is not about being enlightened. This is about being open and listening finally to individuals in our society that have felt for far too long, and rightfully, that they haven't been seen or valued or heard, and in some cases not even loved. And if we can start from the construct of belonging, deep belonging, we have to then help people be seen, be heard, be valued and loved. And we can only do that when we sit down and listen to understand. It's the only way, I believe, that we can continue to go forward. And there are far more intelligent people than me who have tried to champion this type of way forward for a very, very long time. You know, heroes, absolute heroes. You know, people like Nelson Mandela, people like Martin Luther King, Maya Angelou, and the list can go on and on. You know, people who have championed our inherent humanity is something that we should celebrate, not tear down. Mm-hmm. We can only do that if we listen, you know, and be open to helping each other heal from the residual of our past through deep contemplation, deep understanding, deep acknowledgement of what has happened, and then being open to moving forward and up and saying, well, no one's now going to be excluded from the table. Will it take longer to make decisions? Sure. But imagine the net gain. You know, imagine that. Imagine, just imagine a world where we no longer see color, where I only see the person. And I just hope and pray that we can get there.
It's remarkable when you say it, especially the last bit about you know, having a voice at the table, and I've recently heard a great analogy for reasons why people are loving technology at the moment is because if there were 15 people on this Zoom call, you'd have 15 people as an equal square.
Yeah.
And that is how it should be in some ways.
Providing they have access to the bandwidth, my friend. Providing they have access to the technology, right? Because that's the thing. But I'm hearing what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, my philosophy has always been this about schools, even, you know, that I've always felt that my students are equal to me and I'm equal to them. The difference is that as an adult, I have different responsibilities that I assume, you know, as I become older, and I take them on readily. And that young people are still kind of under construction, but that doesn't mean that they can't make a contribution. That doesn't mean that they don't have a voice. That doesn't mean that they don't feel injustice, you know? And why shouldn't we include young people as part of the conversation? Why shouldn't we include our elderly as part of the conversation? You know how powerful that intergenerational, a relationship would be? You know, you've got the vitality of the young, and then you've got the young at heart coming together, you know, working together. I think that would be powerful, totally powerful. And they should be coming together. And then we should have people of color, and then we should have people of different sexual orientations, and we should have people of different ability. You know, there are so many people in our communities that have learning disabilities, but why should we define them by that? Because we all have something to contribute to this community. Everyone has value to bring if we are simply open to listening to understand, because that's ultimately about listening to understand everyone's possibility.
No, it's beautiful. That's beautiful. Adriano, I want to say thank you so much. It's been a thrilling conversation, and definitely the one that I'm going to listen to and watch back many, many times. And I look forward to connecting with the future. I'll be stopping the recording soon, but Adriano, I want to say thank you so much for your generosity in terms of time for this commitment. I know we're doing this over multiple time zones at the moment.
Yes, we are.
But also in terms of the depth of your sharing, that's incredible, and something that's rarely seen in the modern world. You know, in a world where, you know, where opinions are very short, where they're very mainstream, where they're very safe. You know, you've knocked those markers out the ground, and you've gone straight to where it matters. So I really appreciate that. It's very insightful for me, very inspiring for me to listen to that conversation, and I'm sure this conversation will provide value to others too.
Mate, look, I really appreciate your time. They're very kind words. Conversations like this happen because of the generosity of people, and you've been very open and giving me the space to be able to share those things. And I think that's an important part of, an important part of how people connect. And I just want to recognize that. And I only want to wish you well. I know you're a Swansea supporter, mate, and they are going to hopefully move up to the English Premier League next season. Is that right? Fingers crossed. Anyway, let's just hope the mighty Chelsea get a win in the FA Cup.
Amazing. My best friend is a huge Chelsea fan, so I'll send this clip to him as well. And
there you go. Go Chelsea.
Bleed blue always.
Bleed blue always. Right. That's right.
Awesome. Right, I'm going to stop the recording now, Adriano, but thank you so much and see you soon.
Thank you.
Wowie, what an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for making time to watch The Future of Wellbeing, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode with another very, very special guest. Until then, stay well, stay safe, and take care. Ciao, ciao.